tonight's video, we'll be looking at scary true crime TikToks that you should watch before bed.
It is over. The missing submarine has been found, and it is not good news. OceanGate said in a statement just moments ago that all 5 passengers have sadly been lost. And we know this because the debris they found is now being confirmed to be from the missing submarine. And they said it was consistent with a catastrophic loss of the pressure chamber. Now, as for their bodies, the US Coast Guard said that they may never be recovered due to the incredibly unforgiving environment. Also, the banging noises, turns out, was never them. But saying that, if the submarine did implode, which it now seems it did, the passengers would have died almost instantly, as opposed to slowly and painfully freezing or suffocating to death. Now, in terms of lawsuits, the waiver that these passengers would have signed was pretty damn comprehensive, and reportedly mentioned death 3 times on page 1. I guess we'll just have to wait and see from the 500 documentaries we all know are about to come out.
I raped and killed women. My name is Ted Bundy, and I was a predator lurking among the innocent. From the outside, I appeared charming and charismatic, but deep inside, a darkness consumed me. I preyed upon young women, luring them into my web of deceit. With a smile on my face, I concealed my true intentions. I roamed the streets seeking my next victim, manipulating their trust and exploiting their vulnerability. The adrenaline rush I felt as I took their lives was an intoxicating thrill, fueling my insatiable appetite for destruction. I carefully planned my heinous acts, stalking and capturing my prey with calculated precision.
Yo, did AI create this or something? Because the fact that he's just sitting here talking and how it looks so real is just kind of creepy. But then again, we are watching creepy TikToks tonight, right?
No one suspected the evil that lurked behind my innocent facade. My twisted desires knew no bounds. As the body count rose, the authorities closed in on me. But even when apprehended, I played the part of the innocent, manipulating the system to maintain control. The courtrooms became my stage, where I reveled in the chaos and confusion I caused. But justice eventually caught up to me, and the truth of my monstrous nature was exposed. My reign of terror came to an end, and I faced the consequences of my horrific actions.
Scariest videos on the internet, part 4. This is a famous statue that is said to be haunted. And someone caught its eyes moving on camera.
What? His eyes moved?
What in the night of the museum is this?
This is one of the most horrific cases I've heard.
Consequences of my horrific...
This is a famous statue that is said to be haunted. And someone caught its eyes moving on camera.
Okay, so that eye does look a little different.
What in the night of the museum is this?
But I feel like, hold on.
This is one of...
I don't know if it moved though. You know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like it had a lot to do with the shadows and the light. But I could be wrong. But just looking at it, I didn't see any motion. I just seen, there looked like there was a pupil and then a shadow and then there wasn't. So I don't know about that one, but that's a little crazy.
One of the most horrific cases I've heard recently, so please be warned before watching. 29-year-old Taylor Parker has just been sentenced to death for a crime so horrendous that I can't believe a human is capable of this. Regan Simmons Hancock and Taylor had met online. Their online friendship soon blossomed into a real-life connection. It was 2022 and Regan was married with a young daughter. She was also 8 months pregnant at this time. Taylor was also pregnant, or so it would seem to the outside world. She was posting pregnancy pictures on social media and even hosted a gender reveal party. Little did her loved ones know that she was actually staging the entire thing. Regan and Taylor were really good friends around this time and they were bonding over their pregnancies. Regan even shared a Facebook status thanking Taylor for bringing her round a gift and Starbucks. This was the day before she would be murdered by Taylor. On Taylor's supposed due date, she made her way round to Regan's house in Texas. Shortly after, Regan's mum made a horrifying discovery. Her daughter was face down on the floor, deceased with blood everywhere. Her mum rang the emergency services and they raced to the scene. It became apparent that her baby had been, and again, a massive trigger warning here, ripped out of her stomach, and Regan had been stabbed over 100 times. Meanwhile, Taylor was pulled over for speeding and driving erratically. She'd actually put the baby in her lap with the umbilical cord coming out of her trousers to make it seem like she'd just given birth. When the pair were taken to hospital, the horrors of what actually happened became apparent. The newborn baby tragically passed away and Taylor was arrested. She was sentenced to death, but her defense lawyer said that her loved ones should have done more to protect her earlier on when she was pretending to be pregnant.
Yo, that's just sick. These girls are, man.
I had 5 skull fractures and multiple contusions in my head, and because of the skull fractures, the 8th nerve was damaged, and I lost the hearing in my left ear and the equilibrium, and I had a broken jaw, and my left shoulder was pulled out of joint, and I was just pretty bruised.
This little girl was kidnapped in 2018 and has just been found. On the 25th of October 2018, 4-year-old Aranza Lopez was on a supervised visit with her biological mum. Her mum, Esmeralda, was being investigated over abuse allegations, so Aranza was actually in foster care at the time. It was arranged that the pair would have a supervised visit at a Washington shopping centre. However, during the visit, Esmeralda requested to take Aranza to the toilets and used the opportunity to snatch the little girl in a stolen vehicle. The FBI were notified and a huge search for Aranza and even advertised a $10,000 reward. It wasn't until a year later that Esmeralda was found and arrested, but there was still no sign of the little girl. That was until last month. She was recovered by Mexican authorities in February in western Mexico. In 2021, Esmeralda was actually extradited back to Washington state and pled guilty to second-degree kidnapping and robbery. She was sentenced to 20 months in prison.
Here are the latest updates.
Dang, that's just crazy, right? Like, I understand the situation, yet it's just messed up. You know, you probably want to have your child, but, you know, the systems then took your child away because you've made some bad choices. So what do? You make another bad choice and you steal your own child from the system, right? And the system ain't playing that. So therefore now you got to go to jail. And what happens? The child suffers even more. It's just messed up, man. That's that whole situation.
The missing Titanic submarine. As of this post, there are roughly 30 hours left in its oxygen supply, so it's a critical race against the clock to find the sub. And it turns out that experts in submersible vehicles wrote a letter several years ago warning the CEO of the missing sub that their approach could end in disaster. And in 2018, David Lockridge, who was the director of marine operations for the company, demanded more rigorous safety checks on the sub and was fired for it. Also, it turns out the sub was controlled with a $30 Logitech controller and has no way of navigating itself underwater. It relies on messages from the mothership, which uses Starlink to do so. Time is ticking. It's a sad story, but let's hope it ends with good news. Puberty will keep you updated.
Let's talk about this picture. It centers around Mr. and Mrs. Dubois. They were some of the town of Hackenshaw's favorite neighbors, but they had a dark side to them. But first, we're gonna enjoy some pizza. This is like my favorite pizza. It's from Marco's Pizza.
Yo, speaking of Marco's, that's also like one of my top, I'd say, I put it in my top 5, right? Top 5 pizza places. But unfortunately for me, Marco's was only linked up with a Family Video in my town, right? Which is basically like another version of Blockbuster from back in the day, which is also closed down. And Family Videos closed down. There's no more Family Videos because nobody's buying DVDs or renting DVDs or renting video games anymore, right? So because of that, I no longer have Marco's Pizza. So I'm a little bit jealous of this guy in his car eating his Marco's Pizza. That looks kind of delicious.
Reminds me of Jersey because I'm from Jersey. You see, they were kind to everyone. Even invited people who just moved into town for dinners. They would also have the best decorations for holidays as well. Their house would always win the contest for best decorated in the town. People just loved their Christmas lights and their Halloween decorations. In the beginning of October 1876, they started throwing parties for the kids. All the kids from around the town would come, even from outside the town. It was fun. They played games, they ate candy, and everyone just had a good time. off. But out of the 20 kids that came over that night, about 4 went missing. And after about 3 weeks of searching, the case went slow and they gave up. Halloween finally came around, and the contest for the best decorations, of course, went to the Dubois. That night while trick-or-treating, one of the boys in town named Sam went up to one of the decorations. When he grabbed the mask off, he realized it was one of the children who went missing. The child was stuffed and put on display in front of the yard as a decoration. The Dubois, who saw this and not wanting to get caught, grabbed the little kid inside, adding him to their collection. No one suspected a thing because the Dubois were so kind and nice to everyone. It wasn't until years later on their deathbed that they admitted at throwing parties every year to steal a child or 3 and told police that they could find all the missing children in their basement. The reason they did it was because they needed decorations realistic enough so they could always win those contests.
Yo, it's crazy the extent people go just to win.
A group of friends took a photo before a big night out, but later when they looked back at the photo, they were stunned with what they saw. A young girl is shown crying and in distress in the bottom right of the photo. She said she didn't want to be in the photo because the little boy was scaring her. Her mother and the other girls present thought she was just being silly. It was only later on when they looked back at the photos of the night, they suddenly realised that she wasn't. Crouching between the legs of the girls is shown a little boy, but there wasn't a little boy there that night.
Oh, snap.
So we know that people
Cardinals.
do fall into hot springs in Yellowstone, like the guy that completely dissolved in one in 2016. Most of these are completely accidental, but have you heard the story of Don Cressy? In 1975, a bunch of young employees at Yellowstone decided they were going to sneak out one night and go into a hot spring. And they invited Don Cressy, who was a 21-year-old chef who had worked in the park for 3 summers. But that night, Don never shows up to the party. 2 days later, a small child stumbles upon his body floating in one of the hottest hot springs in the area. So the theory at the time was that Don had gotten into the wrong hot spring while trying to attend the party with his coworkers, and he accidentally jumped into one that boiled him alive. Here's the twist, and I talk about it in the episode. Not only was that hot spring not anywhere near where the party was taking place, but his car was not at the party. Someone had fully driven him there. Everyone who was at the party said that they never saw him show up, but he must have gotten there with someone. It was eventually ruled accidental, but his friends just felt like that never made sense. He had worked at the park for 3 summers and he knew it better than anyone. He knew to not get into that specific hot spring.
Right.
So one time someone did dive headfirst into boiling water at Yellowstone after a dog. In 1981, David Kirwan was at Yellowstone with a friend when his friend's dog got away and jumped into a 200-degree hot spring. People around were screaming at David to not go in after the dog, but he didn't even give it a second thought. He just dove straight in. Some people completely dissolve when they do this because the pools tend to be very acidic, which I talk about in this week's episode, but that didn't happen here. So David was able to...
Like, just look at that hot spring, y'all. Who would ever want to jump into that? Like, what? What? I'm sorry, man. Like, my friend's dog jumps in this water. I'm not able to go save him. I'm just saying. I'm just saying. I'm not going to be able to do it. I'm not even going to lie to y'all. I can't. I wouldn't. No.
swim out far enough to get the dog, but he realized it was way too hot, so he had to leave the dog and turned around to come back. His friend was able to pull him out, but at this point David was completely blind from the boiling water getting into his eyes. A stranger had also run over to help, and he tried to take David's shoe off of his foot, but David's skin had completely melted and started coming off with the shoe. And on top of all of this tragedy, Moosey, the dog, unfortunately didn't make it out of the hot spring. She was completely lost. And David also succumbed to the burns the next day. You'd assume at this point people know the dangers of the hot springs, but people go into them way more often than you'd think. If you have a dark curiosity about this kind of stuff, you might be interested in the episode I just did.
Ayo, something traumatic happened that changed my life. Check.
Oh my god.
What is this? Yo, what was that, y'all? I ain't never seen nothing like that before. You know, a bunch of people doing some type of ritual out here. It's crazy. Yeah, y'all, these are some of the most scary and true crime TikToks that are out today. If you liked the video, don't forget to subscribe, turn your notification bell on, and until next time, YouTube, peace.